They've been demonized for a long time. But sad to say, a lot of it in the mainstream media, as well as by the online people. This is a massive escalation, and one hopes that they can be protected properly by the police.
First, the riots, they have continued to rage across the country. There was violence in Plymouth and Belfast overnight, and the graves of 3 people in the Muslim section of a cemetery in Burnley were desecrated. The Justice Minister, Heidi Alexander, has told Times Radio the government will deliver justice even if more court capacity is needed.
I think we will make it work because these are extraordinary circumstances and we need to be delivering swift justice. We've obviously had a very robust police response to what has been going on our streets and in our communities, but the way we are going to stop this is if we deliver swift and effective justice.
Swift and effective, but the Criminal Bar Association argues there simply are not enough lawyers available for that work. This, of course, as the Prime Minister got into an argument with Elon Musk after the owner of X suggested Britain was facing a civil war over immigration. Well, in a moment we'll speak to Damien Collins, a former Conservative Technology Minister, previous chair of the committee that looked after the online safety bill. First, though, let's speak to Francis Fitzgibbon. He's the former chair at the Criminal Bar Association. Francis, I don't know if you heard the clip there from Heidi Alexander saying that justice would be swift and that the capacity was there. You, of course, know the people who actually know what's going on and have to deliver this outcome. Is there sufficient court capacity?
I think they're going to have to find it. As you probably know, the whole criminal justice system has been quite seriously run down for many years. They've sold a lot of court buildings. There are fewer duty solicitors than there were. There are fewer criminal lawyers than there were. So there is a real capacity issue right across the system, including, as you alluded to, prison spaces as well. But I think in an emergency like this, a way will be found. The precedent is 2011, when there was widespread rioting across the country, and the system coped. I mean, there's more strain on it now because its capacity has been reduced.
Are there existing provisions for sort of a surge in capacity? Is there a playbook for what happens when suddenly there is a situation like this?
Well, there are protocols that they developed in 2011, but your report about the failure to maintain submarines has some resonance here, because, like many bits of the public service, the court service, the court system has not been well maintained, and there's very little slack to be taken up in a case like the present one.
24-hour courts have been talked about?
Yes, they did that in 2011, but I think the numbers then that were being processed were much greater than those coming through at the moment. So I think, as I understand it, maybe wrong, but as I understand it, the existing court arrangements are enough to handle the people who are coming through. I think the real point is to send the message out that you're going to be dealt with very quickly.
Well, this is a point I wanted to raise with you because, of course, there is a big backlog of cases. We know about the backlog in rape cases, for example, or alleged rape cases. How do the courts handle this idea that suddenly everything has to be, or these particular cases have to be done very, very quickly?
Well, it is going to be a challenge for them. I think the system is quite good at handling a crisis of this kind. It doesn't help that there is this enormous backlog, and I can tell you about something I was involved with very recently, where if there had to be a retrial, fortunately there wasn't. It would have gone off till February 26, and that's not unusual. These very, very long delays because of the lack of court capacity. But I think probably everyone would just pull a finger out and make sure that these cases go to the front of the queue and dealt with very quickly. It does mean there'll be some knock-on for people who are already waiting, but I guess that's just the way things are going to have to be.
Well, that seemed to be, the what followed on from what you were saying there is that because we have this surge in these particular cases from the riots, then people who are expecting their cases to be heard in the next couple of weeks might have to wait longer.
Well, they might.
Yeah.
I think most of this work in the first instance will be done in the magistrates' court, which is well used to dealing with things very quickly.
Mm.
Those that have to go up to the Crown Court for trial or sentence may find themselves waiting a bit longer. But like the chap who was crying in the dock when he discovered he was going to be remanded in custody, it might be a bit of a wake up for people to think, well, hang on a minute, I've broken a window or I've made a threat and now I'm going to pay for it by months in jail.
The Times yesterday was reporting that far-right groups online were publishing the addresses and names of immigration lawyers this week. What are your thoughts on that? This is a pretty worrying development, isn't it?
I think that escalates the whole horror of it by several degrees. That these are people who work really hard to establish the rights of their clients, no more than that. They've been demonized for a long time. But sad to say, a lot of it in the mainstream media, as well as by the online people. So this is a massive escalation, and one hopes that they can be protected properly by the police.
Thank you very much, Francis Fitzgibbon, former chair at the Criminal Bar Association. Excuse me. Let's talk to Damien Collins, former Conservative Technology Minister, also chair of the committee that looked after the select committee that looked after the online safety bill. Damien, thanks very much for joining us. Can you just clear something up for us? As I understand it, the new online safety bill, well, not so new now, I guess, does have a specific provision for if not inciting riots online, at least inciting acts of violence or hatred online.
Well, that's right. And I think there's been a debate in the last week or so about whether we can act against disinformation online. Well, it depends what that disinformation is doing. But where it is inciting racial hatred, inciting violence, these are public order offences that are listed on the face of the Online Safety Act. And Ofcom, as the regulator, absolutely has the power to hold the companies to account for content on their platforms, content they are actively promoting and recommending to their users. So they have the power, and I think Ofcom should be making clear to the companies now how they will use that power and the standards that they will expect them to meet.
Ofcom presumably would hold the companies to account, the ones that run the platforms. What about the police's ability to hold individuals who post this kind of stuff responsibility? Because I think there is a criminal offence for this in the bill as well, isn't there?
Well, those offences have already existed, and people have been prosecuted in the past for hate speech online, for example. So there were some people that racially abused the England footballers in 2021. But the issue here was with the Online Safety Act is to create responsibilities and liabilities of the platforms themselves, because the platforms don't just host this content, they actively promote and recommend it. And there will be users who are seeing a preponderance of disinformation, hate speech, maybe content that may incite people to join in or support violent acts. And this is on their platforms. And we've seen this happen in the past. There was a big debate about this in America after the riots in Washington, D.C. in 2021 about the role of social media platforms in building an audience and radicalizing people online. And the concern is we're seeing the same things happening now. That's why we passed the Online Safety Act. That's why we included some of these offences around, incitement to violence and racial hatred in that act to make it absolutely clear the platforms would have robust policies to act against that kind of content.
What happens if Ofcom doesn't get involved and make an example of someone here?
Well, at the moment, Ofcom is consulting on the codes of practice with the tech companies. That's how they will meet the obligations set out in the Act. But I think what Ofcom should do now is make it absolutely clear that they will audit the performance of the companies in terms of what they're doing now to dampen the effect of this kind of hate speech, this sort of content that may be inciting violent acts. They will audit that after the event. They've got the legal power to appoint outside experts to come in and do that. So the companies know that the decisions they're making now internally about how they respond to this will be assessed by the regulator. I think they should make that absolutely clear. I think what the government could do as well is look at the information it's getting from its own counter-disinformation unit, whose job it is to identify networks being operated and controlled on social media by hostile foreign states like Russia, and actually not only make sure the companies are acting against those networks, taking them down, but I think to say if they won't, then they will publish information that says that the companies were warned, the companies were asked to do it, and they've refused to comply.
Step back into history, really. I know you've written a book on David Lloyd George, the Prime Minister, who in 1919 had to deal with some of the worst race riots the country had ever seen. A reminder, actually, that this is, in a sense, nothing new. How did he deal with them? And are there any lessons from what he did? It's a fairly heavy-handed approach from what I've read.
Well, I mean, I suppose there we're talking about a policing response to civil unrest. There was a great deal of civil unrest at the end of the First World War, and a great fear of revolutionary movements, which, in particular in Glasgow, where there was a big sort of almost communist uprising in the centre of the city. So I'm not sure we necessarily want to learn from the policing methods of those days, but what they didn't have to contend with was the way in which information is distributed. In those days, there may be protests on the streets that you'd want to control. There may be a mob in a town square you wanted to control and bring to order. Today, that town square exists in the palm of our hands and creates a much more complex challenge. And that's why it's important the people who distribute that kind of information are held responsible for the decisions they make as a business over what people see.
Thank you very much, Damien Collins, a former Conservative Technology Minister.